This video begins where every responsible video about a missing child should begin, with the child himself, not the adults, not the internet, not the theories that came later. Sebastian Wayne Drake Rogers is a child with his own medical, developmental, and emotional profile, his own personality. He is his own person. In a missing child's case, that matters, not as a label, not as an excuse, and not as a conclusion, but as context. Because investigators do not search for an abstract missing child. They search for this child with these needs in this environment during this window of time. One of the most important clarifications that has emerged over time is that Sebastian's autism diagnosis was recent at the time of his disappearance. This is critical because it means early public understanding of his needs, behaviors, and risk factors was incomplete. It is something that a child lives with long before it is named. What we know now is that Sebastian had been experiencing behavioral challenges before his autism diagnosis and continued to experience them after. Those challenges were not widely discussed in the beginning, not because they were unimportant, but because families often protect their children's privacy, and early investigations focus on immediate facts, not full medical histories. As time passed, additional context has become relevant to understanding the search itself. Understanding Sebastian's recent autism diagnosis and his underlying genetic condition does not answer what happened to him, but it does help explain why early searches focused the way that they did, why that time mattered so much, why assumptions about behavior were unreliable, and why simplistic narratives failed this case almost immediately. This context also explains why responsible coverage must resist turning medical complexity into blame or certainty. A child with these challenges does not disappear because of a diagnosis. He disappears because something went wrong. And when a case like this becomes noisy before it becomes understood, the risk is not just misinformation. The risk is that the search itself becomes compromised. Sebastian's disappearance began as a real-world emergency involving a vulnerable child with complex needs, some of which were never fully understood by the public. Before theories, before creators, before conflict. If we're going to examine everything that followed, honestly, we have to start here. What was known, what was not, and why that gap matters. Because when the foundation is misunderstood, everything built on top crumbles. Beyond autism, Sebastian had other medical complexities. Sebastian has 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome, a rare genetic condition involving the deletion of genetic material on the long arm of chromosome 6. This condition is associated with a wide range of possible developmental and neurological effects. Not every child with this deletion presents the same way, but documented features can include developmental delays, intellectual disabilities, speech and communication challenges, behavioral dysregulation, impulsivity or poor danger awareness, seizure disorder in some cases, difficulty with emotional regulations, sensory sensitivities, and difficulty responding appropriately under stress. This matters for one reason and one reason only: risk assessment. A child with this profile may wander without understanding dangers, may hide rather than seek help, may fail to respond when their name is called, may become overwhelmed and shut down, may move unpredictably, may be unable to explain who they are or where they belong. That does not make the child responsible for anything. It makes the situation more urgent, and it reframes what investigators must consider in the earliest hours of their investigation. Sebastian was reported missing in Tennessee on February 26, 2024. Public information established a last known time frame and general location, and authorities emphasized that he may require assistance to return home. From the beginning, this was not treated as a casual disappearance. Local, state, and federal resources did become involved. The FBI entered the case. A reward was eventually offered. The public was asked to submit tips directly to law enforcement. Early searches focused on probability, not accusations. Investigators had to consider what was most likely for this child. Could he leave home on foot? Could he seek a familiar or quiet place? Could he hide due to fear or sensory overload? Could he fail to respond to searchers calling his name? Could he move further than expected without recognizing danger? This is why wooded areas, nearby terrain, and accessible routes mattered so much in the first phase of search involving a neurodivergent child. It is also why assumptions are so dangerous. Because in the earliest hours, investigators cannot afford to narrow prematurely. They must explore multiple scenarios until evidence rules them out. In the beginning, the public only knew the most basic facts. Sebastian was missing. There was the last known window. He may need assistance. What the public did not know yet is that there were deeper medical and developmental layers that later became relevant to understanding his vulnerabilities. That gap mattered because when information is incomplete, people fill it in with speculation, and speculation is never neutral. Autism and 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome are not the same thing, but they can overlap in ways that is often misunderstood, especially in a missing child's case. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition defined by differences in communication, social interaction, sensory processing, and behavior. It is diagnosed based on observed traits and developmental patterns, not a single biological test. Autism exists on a spectrum, meaning individuals can present very different from one another. Some autistic individuals are highly verbal and independent, while others require significant support. What unites the diagnoses is not intelligence or ability, but differences in how the brain processes information and responds to the world. 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome is a rare genetic condition caused by missing genetic material on the long arm of chromosome 6. Unlike autism, it is a chromosomal disorder with a specific biological origin that can be identified through genetic testing. This deletion can often affect brain development, neurological function, physical development, and behavior. The severity and presentation vary widely depending upon the size of the deletion and which genes are affected. Here is where the similarities matter. Both autism and 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome can involve or include difficulties with communication, challenges with emotional regulations, sensory sensitivities, impulsivity, difficulty understanding danger, trouble responding under stress, behavioral dysregulation, and inconsistent responses to name or commands. From the outside, these overlapping traits can look very similar. A child may appear non-responsive, overwhelmed, avoidant, or unpredictable. In a missing child situation, this overlap increases risk. It affects how the child might react to fear, strangers, searchers, or an unfamiliar environment. However, the differences are just as important. Autism is a descriptive diagnosis. It explains how a person experiences and interacts with the world, but it does not by itself explain why those differences exist on a biological level. Many autistic individuals do not have any underlying genetic syndrome and may have otherwise typical neurological development. 6q27 chromosomal deletion, on the other hand, is a genetic condition. It can include autism-like traits, but it can also include neurological and medical complications that autism alone does not account for. These may include intellectual disabilities, seizure disorder, structural brain differences, muscle tone issues, and more significantly, difficulties with executive functions. Another key difference is predictability. Autism alone can still allow for fairly consistent routines and learned safety behavior over time. Many autistic children, once supported, develop predictable patterns and coping strategies. With 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome, behavior and functioning can be more variable. Stress, fatigue, illness, or environmental overload can lead to sudden changes in behavior, emotional shutdown, or impulsive actions that are harder to anticipate or control. This distinction matters deeply in this missing child's case. A child with autism may wander. A child with chromosomal deletion may wander and be unable to self-correct, seek help, or recognize danger. A child with autism may hide when overwhelmed. A child with chromosomal deletion may hide and lack the ability to respond to searchers or explain who they are. Let me be clear, neither condition causes a child to disappear. However, both conditions together significantly increase vulnerability. Another important point is timing. Sebastian's autism diagnosis was recent. This means behaviors associated with autism may have been present long before they were named, and supports may not have yet been fully established. At the same time, the effects of 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome are lifelong, even if not fully understood early on. This creates a gap where behaviors existed before explanations do, and when explanations come later, people often misuse them. Medical and developmental conditions are not evidence, they are not motives, and they are not proof of anything, they are context. Understanding the similarities between autism and 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome helps explain why early assumptions about behavior, response, and risk were incomplete, and why the failure to account for both conditions may have been detrimental to Sebastian's case. Understanding the differences explains why this case required extreme caution and urgency, and why restraint from the public should have been priority from the very beginning. When a child with complex neurological and developmental needs goes missing, the margin for error is small. When that complexity is turned into speculation, followed by an online circus of misinformation, allegations, and lies, the child is placed at an even greater risk. When that speculation is further fueled by someone associated with the missing child, in ways that appear retaliatory or punitive towards others involved in the case, the direction of the case shifts away from the investigation and towards the conflict. That is a turn that should have never been taken. This is why medical context belongs at the beginning of Sebastian's story, not as an afterthought and not as an explanation of what happened, but to understand what was possible and how this case went wrong almost from the start. So what exactly went wrong from the start? In my view, it is the word autism, because the word autism became the focus instead of the child. From the moment autism entered the conversation, too many creators saw an opportunity. Autism is emotional. Autism drives engagement. Autism brings outrage, sympathy, certainty, and clicks. And instead of treating it as one part of Sebastian's life and needs, it was treated as a hook. Sebastian became reduced to a single word. Not a child with a personality, relationships, medical complexities, and a future, but a label that could be argued over, sensationalized, and exploited. Autism was spoken about constantly, but rarely with care, rarely with accuracy, and almost never with restraint. In claiming to care about Sebastian, many forgot that he was more than autism, and in doing so, that caused him real harm. This case stopped being about finding a child and became about performing concern, about controlling narratives, about punishing people who did not align, about monetizing fear and certainty in the absence of answers. Hope does not survive in that environment. When creators focus obsessively on one word instead of the whole child, they narrow the public's understanding, distort expectations, and poison the search. When that focus is amplified for attention and money, it doesn't just mislead the audience, it destroys trust, fractures families, and erases the child at the center of it all. Sebastian's family was torn apart in this process. His name was used as a weapon, his disappearance became content, and his memory has been reshaped around conflict instead of compassion. Now that is my opinion in how this case was ruined online, not by caring too much, but by caring loudly, performatively, and profitably while losing sight of the child himself. Sebastian deserved better than that. They turned trauma into entertainment, left compassion in containment.